What's that? Yeah, it works for me. Well, good morning, everybody. We have somebody just entering. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is, of course, the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program workshop on the draft guidelines. My name is Brian Annis. I'm the Undersecretary for the State Transportation Agency. I'm joined here to my right by Chad Edison, who's the Deputy Secretary for Transportation. Also in the room, we have Caltrans staff that manages this program. Let me introduce a few, and please wave your hand for those that are here in the room. Gila Priebe is the manager, and Ezekiel Castro, Andrew Franco. Andrew is our new disadvantaged community liaison, so many of you will be talking to him. Nelia Spurk, and Sandra Bradman. Yes, welcome. So we have, in addition to the folks in the room today, we're also streaming this, and we'll post it on the CalSTA website and also on the Caltrans website. And behind me here we have the web addresses for both the agency and the department. Those should be up in the next couple days for people to review later. But I'm going to get us started on the agenda, the first few slides here, and then I'll pass it off to Chad Edison. We do have a fairly small group in the room here, so I think we can be somewhat informal if people want to interrupt us as we go. That's allowable. We'll have more of a formal question and answer as we finish the presentation, but again, if people want to stop us as we go, that's fine as well. For some of you, this may be review because we did a discussion draft workshop series a few months ago as well, but we're going to go over the basics again, talking about the overview of the guidelines in the program. Talk about the recent changes to statute that affected the program with Senate Bill 9, Senator Bell's bill. We're going to talk about the changes that are in the draft guidelines for 2016. And again, lastly, end with Q&A. And as we go through the presentation, there'll be more detail on dates and deadlines and so forth as well. The next slide talks about funding. And for those of you that were applicants in our first round, you already have learned that funding for this program is a little bit variable. When we did last year's program, we did a call for projects that originally cited $125 million. Because of the auction proceeds from the cap and trade program that came in subsequent to that, we were able actually to almost double the program, and the final awarded projects sum to $224 million in state funds. We have probably even more variability going into the second cycle. We have an existing appropriation that was established in Assembly Bill 862 in 2014. It's called a continuous appropriation, and what that means is on an ongoing basis, 10% of overall cap and trade proceeds that go into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund are directed to this Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program. So the amount of revenue that generates is dependent on future auctions. But again, 10% of those auction proceeds will go to this program. We cite a number here that's based on what's built into the January governor's budget. And this covers carryover funds from the current fiscal year. The total auction proceeds for the current fiscal year were initially budgeted at $2 billion, but the current budget shows them at $2.4 billion. So 10% of that extra $400 million is $40 million, and so that's the current year piece. And then we go for 2 additional years, 16-17 and 17-18, $200 million a year. And that's how we get to our $440 million for the program from the continuous appropriation. The second bullet notes that the governor has also proposed, as part of both the special session package and the January budget, to augment funding for this program, and specifically $400 million a year that would not be a percentage of proceeds, but would be a flat amount to supplement the 10% appropriation. $400 million a year for 2 years would generate the $800 million we cite there. And lastly, as part of the proposal, there's some loan repayments due to the public transportation account that total about, I believe, $275 million. That would be repaid over 4 years. We put in a $90 million figure of what might be available this year and next year for that amount. So again, variability in this, the bigger number, which if you sum the numbers here, would be about $1.3 billion. That really won't be determined until the budget's concluded for this fiscal year through the legislature. But we cite those numbers because if the numbers do come in, or the funding comes in at that level, we do want to have the option to go ahead and fund projects at that higher level. So I'm going to go ahead now and pass off the mic to Chad Edison, who will continue the PowerPoint.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about the transition here, but what I'm going to go through now is both the objectives of the program, some of the factors we consider in evaluation, and some of the deadlines that are important. And so I'm going to go through the PowerPoint here. I need to stand somewhere else to be out of the way of the projector. The objectives of the program are in statute, and those are related to modernization of California's transit systems, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, expand and improve transit service to increase ridership, integrate the rail services of the state's various rail operators, including integration with high-speed rail, and improving transit safety. And so these objectives are repeated in what you will see in the primary evaluation criteria in some of the other areas of our program. And we expand on what projects look like that achieve these things in our guidelines. Eligible applicants are limited to public agencies, including joint power authorities that operate or have planning responsibility for existing or planned regularly scheduled transit services. And those services are identified, again, both in statute and in our guidelines. They include intercity rail and associated feeder bus services, commuter rail services, commuter bus services, and bus, ferry, and rail transit services, including van pool services sponsored by public agencies. The eligible projects, the one thing that every project has to do is demonstrate a reduction in greenhouse gases. And so the documentation for that, the support for how you get to your calculations is a very important factor in our evaluation. Because by statute, our program has to deliver this, and we look at the risk of not delivering it in our evaluation. The projects include, but are not limited to, rail capital projects, intercity, commuter, and urban rail projects that increase service levels, improve reliability, or decrease travel time, rail, bus, and ferry integration implementation, and then bus rapid transit, bus and ferry transit investments, including van pool to increase ridership, including implementation of transit effectiveness studies. Again, if we have questions about any of these project types during the Q&A, I think we can take some of those questions. Our evaluation criteria really go back to the objectives. They look at the reduction in GHG emissions, increases in ridership, integration with other operators, and improving safety as the primary evaluation criteria. And then our secondary criteria include a whole list of co-benefits, which include some of the same kinds of things that are also reflected in the primary benefits, the reduction in VMT and auto trips, promoting housing and employment near rail and transit, really the location efficiency of some of the projects, the connectivity, clean vehicle technology, et cetera. And then we have additional secondary criteria, the benefits to disadvantaged communities, collaboration among rail operators, consistency with sustainable community strategies, geographic equity, and so on. just because things are listed on the secondary criteria list doesn't mean that you shouldn't make some effort to quantify them. So one thing I'd like to make clear is that we're not just, there are some things that can only be described qualitatively, but if you have quantification of things that are part of the secondary criteria list, we encourage you to document that and tell us how you got to the analysis that you performed. In terms of project selection, we go through all of the evaluation criteria and we establish a rating on each of those as part of the evaluation, and then we also look at risks involved in the project. We look at the risk related to the claimed GHG emissions reduction benefits, the cost, scope, and schedule of the project readiness, the leverage of funds from other GHG reduction programs, and the leverage for discretionary funds that you might have put towards your project from other sources. In 2015, we selected $224 million worth of projects over 14 different projects. Just to point out, 13 of those 14 had benefits to disadvantaged communities. Many of them had benefits within disadvantaged communities. That made up 95% of the funding. So just because our program has a statutory minimum of 25% doesn't mean that we're not looking to try to address disadvantaged community benefits in every project that can achieve those. So of our funding, 95% went to projects that delivered those kinds of benefits. Senate Bill 9 made a number of changes, clarifications, and kind of putting into statute things that were also in our previous guidelines. And those include a specific definition around transformative capital improvements, focuses on significantly reducing VMT, reduction in congestion, and reduction in GHG emissions by creating a new transit system, increasing the capacity of an existing transit system, or significantly increasing the ridership of a transit system by other means. So this is really the focus of the types of projects we're looking for. Ridership is important, and service to new parts of the region is also important. Senate Bill 9 also confirmed the eligibility of bus and ferry transit throughout the program. In 862, there were a number of places where language related to bus and ferry wasn't consistently carried through, and SB 9 clarified that. It also required the approval of multi-year program of projects, and set July 1st of 2018 as the time at which we needed to adopt a 5-year program, and then it puts us on a 2-year programming cycle similar to the STIP every even year by April 15th after that, revising the 5-year program and adding 2 years to it. So that is the course we are on. This current call for projects will focus on the next 2 years of funding, 16-17 and 17-18. And then we will, as soon as these project selections are over, go into our development of the 5-year programming guidelines, and we expect that if the calendar holds, that we would have a call for projects in late summer 2017, early fall 2017 for that 5-year program. So just so you're kind of aware of where this is going as we comply with the SB 9 provisions, that's what we see happening. And that 5-year program then would involve funds out through fiscal year 22-23. In the awards made by July 1st of 2018. Eligible project types expanded to include a description of infrastructure access payments to host railroads in lieu of capital investment. This is a tool in the negotiations with host railroads that can allow us to achieve access by means other than solely putting in upfront capital investments. So that's something that is allowable as a project expense as part of the applications. Project evaluation, again, putting in statute many of the things that we were already doing in our guidelines. The extent to which a project reduces GHG emissions needs to be considered in the evaluation. In the co-benefits, specifically looking at projects that support an sustainable community strategy, enhancing the connectivity, integration, and coordination of the state's various transit systems, and then supplemental funding from non-state sources to be considered, as well as increases in transit ridership. Senate Bill 9 specified that an applicant could submit an application to fund a project over multiple fiscal years, that the 5-year program needed to be in place by July 1st of 2018, and that a grantee could ask the CTC for a letter of no prejudice to allow the agency to expend its own money in advance of an allocation. So if you received an award for funding and the cash from the award wasn't available until 17-18, and you had project expenditures on that pre-approved project in advance of that, you could be reimbursed from the 17-18 funding. That's just the nature of this, and we needed the specific statutory authority to do that for the CTC to issue that letter of no prejudice, and this bill provided that. In the draft guidelines that you see posted on our website back in December, the ones that we're discussing today, we made a number of conforming amendments in the guidelines related to SB 9. We also put in place a pre-application optional meeting with CalSTA in February. I will go into the details of that in a moment. We provided significant new detail on the evaluation process. On each of the primary criteria, we provided an explanation of what a highly rated project would look like. And we also addressed that in the context of the overall secondary evaluation criteria and some of the risk factors that we would be looking at. In the eligible project descriptions, new funding options such as smartphone mobile ticketing, rail infrastructure access payments, and transit effectiveness studies that were combined with implementation investments. Those were detailed as additional examples of eligible projects. And then there's a further encouragement to coordinate with other greenhouse gas reduction programs to the extent possible, and some guidance on how to do that. The key dates that you should focus on here, the guidelines were released on December 18th, which started a 30-day clock before we could have these public workshops. We will have a final presentation to the California Transportation Commission tomorrow. And then on January 22nd, comments on our guidelines are due. So if you're going to make comments in written form, please send them to the program program email address, which is at the end of the listed in the guidelines. It's also at the end of this presentation. CARB released its quantification methodology for this program, the draft methodology, on January 12th. That is both on the CalSTA website, the Caltrans website, and the CARB website. CARB is asking for comments on that methodology no later than January 26th. And both the CARB quantification methodology and the CalSTA guidelines will be finalized by February 4th. On February 5th, CalSTA will put out its call for projects. That is the current plan. And then by April 5th, the applications for those projects will be due. February 22nd to 26th is the week that we have scheduled for meeting opportunities around the state. There's another slide on the details of that in the back of the presentation. And then on August 1st, we expect to publish our list of approved projects based on the funding made available to us as of that date or around that date. The pre-application meeting opportunities are around the state to provide the most access to potential applicants. We have the dates on the calendar. They will be at various Caltrans district offices. The first of them will be in Sacramento on Monday the 22nd, followed by Oakland, Los Angeles, San Diego, and Fresno. And we encourage you even now to request meetings by emailing the program email address at tircpcomments@dot.ca.gov. Caltrans will be accumulating the requests for these pre-meetings and helping us set schedules for each day. Our goal is to meet with as many agencies as we can fit into a day. If we run into oversubscription of the time slots that we have available, we'll try to address that by identifying alternative meeting locations or alternative meeting dates. Additional detail will be provided in the call for projects, but we expect the deadline for requesting these meetings to be between the 10th and 12th of February, so don't delay in asking for one if you think you're going to want one. We expect to cover clarification of projects as they align with the guidelines and in understanding of the guidelines as well in call for projects, as well as questions you might have related to quantification. We may be able to address some of those in the meetings themselves, and other questions we may put into FAQs that we publish on our website. and CARB as well as we deal with the questions that come in the quantification. But much of the call for projects, other than the changes necessary to adapt to the changes in guidelines, will look similar to what you saw last year, and the QM is posted and has evolved since last year, and so you can already start thinking about how your projects will align with the program and develop those plans to address some of those questions in the pre-application meeting opportunities. At this point, that's the end of the formal presentation. I'd like to open it up for questions, and when Brian will be passing the microphone back and forth, I will try to restate the question, but please speak loudly so that those on the webinar can hear your question as well, and I'll try to restate it for that purpose also. Yes.
It sounds like you're going to start a call for projects, and the minimum that you'd have available is about $400 million, but it could potentially be up to $1.2 billion.
1.3,
so
yeah.
that original call for projects will encompass whatever is available after the budget is approved in, I guess, July 1st of 2016?
That's what the question was, what will the call for projects encompass in terms of funding, and does that, starting with the $440 million, what will be the ultimate level of award? And as Brian pointed out earlier, the range of kind of $440 million to $1.3 billion is kind of what's in the budget conversation right now as it relates to the governor's budget proposals. We anticipate that the level of funding that is set in the budget, that relates to the years that we're awarding funding for, will be what we proceed to award with. And so that if that's done by July 1st, that would affect our August 1st selections. It's also possible that our August 1st date would slide a little bit on the announcement if there were imminent decisions yet to be made on the budget that could affect the amount of funding available. So it's our goal to make awards related to the funding that the legislature has put in place for the budget cycle and for the years that we have for the current 3-year program, including the residual from this year.
Talk scalability.
Yeah, so one of the important things here, and we indicate this throughout the guidelines, is showing scalability in your projects, to really have strategies that show, portions of projects that can advance, or smaller scale projects that you might do if we had a smaller level of funding available, and then also showing what you would add to your program if the higher level of funding were available. So the program has to address geographic equity. It has to provide funding to worthy projects around the state, and we also have the goal of not having the money sit there for many years just because of programming cycles. So it's our goal to put the funds out there and make them available, since all of these projects have ramp-up periods and the cash gets drawn over a number of years. So it's important that projects are phased, scalable, that you show us what additional benefits you would ask for with a higher level of funding, what you would achieve with that higher level of funding if you were to achieve it. A number of our successful projects this last time around did that in the application, where they indicated that they had a BRT system and 4 routes that they wanted to improve service on, and that allowed us, in cases of not having sufficient funds to fund it all, to fund 2 or 3 elements out of the 5 or 6 that they put in their application. And so this was valuable the first time around in terms of aligning the funding with the project applications that came in. And also other agencies submitted multiple applications and then prioritized those applications. As much information as you provide us in the process, that's helpful overall in terms of allowing us to match the funds in geographic equity with the project applications. And there's a high risk if you put in just a very large number. If you put in an application, say for $600 million, and there was no way to break that into smaller pieces, that project, even if it was worthy, would have a hard time getting selected, simply because of the potential for the funds to not be sufficient for that project. Yes, Jim.
Hi, I have 2 questions. The first question is, based on what you said, if you have a larger project that can be phased, and the phasing part is the more affordable and perhaps the more chosen approach at this point in time, does having the approval of the initial phase of the project implicate that the rest of the other benefits of the project over a longer time would be eligible for or automatically make the list when the multi-year allocation, and I think I know the answer, but are you approving just the phasing part and you may never get the rest of it, or is it the whole thing but it started with this initial bit? That's my first question.
So the question that Jim asked from CCJPA is whether whether a phased project that gets funded for the first phase whether that approval of that project at the first phase implies a approval of the project for later funding in a future round, for the rest of the project. And the short answer to that is that does not necessarily assume, you shouldn't assume that you're going to get funding for the rest of the project if you got approved for the first phase of it or the first part of it that comes through the application. It may very well continue to be a project that is competitive in the program, but we're not assuming that. Thus, it's important to show projects that, phases that can actually deliver benefits with the funding that phase would provide. And yet the consideration of the project in its broader scale helps us see what vision there is to achieve more with a project and how the initial phase is a foundation to that broader project. And in that context, having that extra vision to the project, even if all the funding can't be committed at this point, is helpful in understanding why we should fund even the first phase of it. So that's, it's not without value to show what more you can do. And if funding allowed for and the project was competitive, we may be able to do more than the first phase. But at the same time, showing a first phase that is on its own competitive and has benefits is very important.
Thank you very much. And the second question is, in situations where an intercity rail system or a commuter rail system is operating on a host railroad, and you mentioned included but not limited to type of benefit analysis of GHG, and also the payments perhaps made to gain access for round trips on a host railroad. If the arrangements with the host railroad include reductions in freight miles traveled and fuel usage, is that something that can be included in the quantification methodologies for the host railroad plus the passenger railroad? Is that allowed for at this point in time, or do we need to make a comment that we hope it would be?
That's a very good question, Jim. And what to repeat for the people on the webinar, Jim is asking about projects that involve shared use corridors with freight railroads where you have a host railroad that may also benefit from the project that you're proposing. And how that would be quantified. And I think this is a good question to put into the queue. I mean, by asking it here, that is in the queue of what CARB and CalSTA will try to address and provide more guidance on. One thing that I would point out is that the CARB quantification method captures the things that are really measured in terms of quantified greenhouse gas reductions and kind of tons of carbon per dollar expended type of calculations. If there are other co-benefits of your project, such as what you've described on the freight side, that may be something that in the end is described as a co-benefit, is one of the secondary criteria. Having the method by which you would quantify that, or having a good way of describing that, would be welcome, regardless of whether it's in the actual quantification that is used for the primary evaluation criteria of reductions in GHG emissions. So we're looking to good work done on all of the benefit categories, including the secondary. And if there are things that, whether it's around the issues of how your project, attracts people to low carbon footprint living in job environments, or whether it's something related to freight that you want to portray, just because it's not in the primary evaluation criteria in that quantification method doesn't mean you can't address it.
Just to clarify, I think we can quantify directly the GHG benefit of the freight rail modifications. According to the methodology, we wanted to know that if that first could be included, and we can certainly do the other co-benefits you were talking about.
Okay.
But I wanted to make sure that we can sum up, if you will, the total GHG reduction from both passenger and freight. And that, I presume that comment is now made and that will be addressed by CARB and CalSTA. Or should we write an additional comment letter to clarify? Either.
Mario, is this sufficient for this to be asked as a question, or do you guys need a written comment? Okay, so I think that CARB is here today. Mario Cruz has joined us, and I think this is sufficient for asking that question. So thank you.
I think to summarize that, your hope is to get into the primary correct evaluation criteria, where the host railroads GHG reductions is the primary evaluation criteria, not the secondary.
That is correct. Yeah, I think I mean, it's the same methodology.
Yes.
We know what's the reduction in miles or something.
Yeah, we understand that. Great.
I have a question on rolling stock.
Yes.
So the draft guidelines do have some guidance on rolling stock, but it's really for options. What if the agency was going to purchase rolling stock as part of the increased expansion service, but didn't have any options to exercise? Would the commission, purchase of rolling stock can take time if
Yes.
options aren't in place?
Yes.
Is there an allowance to purchase rolling stock with a potentially extended time period?
Yes, so the question is on purchase of rolling stock, if that rolling stock is not already part of an active contract, is there allowance for rolling stock to be purchased as part of a project? And the short answer is absolutely. We're not tied to, in fact, the reason some of the guidance is there on contracts that are already in place is to indicate that exercising an option on a contract that's already been awarded is assuming that you haven't already funded that option, is something that our funds can be put to. But that does not exclude a project from coming in and saying we need to acquire rolling stock as part of our project and expend funds on that. The time frames for expending our funds, other than the 14-15 funds, which had a specific, because they were Budget Act appropriations of a fixed amount in a budget year, had specific requirements for when those obligations were made and when the funds were liquidated. The continuous appropriation funds do not have the same provisions, and so we're still looking for you to stay on the schedule that you put forward in your application. But to show project expenditures in the future for rolling stock and to go through a competitive procurement to achieve that acquisition is clearly something that could be part of a project and could be part of your budget. I will indicate that the further you are from construction, the more risk there is that the project funds that you ask for us for might not be enough to handle an escalated cost, and we don't allow projects to come back in and ask for supplemental funding beyond what was awarded in the original project unless there's a significant scope addition, and that would compete on the basis of that scope addition. So we're basically, funding in a specific amount. There is some risk if you have a lot of procurements to go through that you might find that the total costs are higher, and you would need to backfill that with other funding sources rather than come to the program and say, the budget's now higher, we need more money. So that's, I think, part of anything that involves kind of long lead procurements.
I think the draft guidelines kind of suggest a 36 or 42 month time frame. So is that, you're saying that that's not necessarily the
30.
case for?
Well, that's after contract award.
That's,
36 months contract award milestone, 36 months completion contract?
I don't, Ezekiel, can you guys, is this
Trying
okay?
to figure out what the sunset is.
Yeah,
if there
so
is
after you award a contract, or you would have 36 months to expend those funds, and if additional time is needed, then you have a 12-month time extension option.
one. Right.
Yeah, I think we'll take this as a question for clarification. So the question is the 36 or 42 month time period or 36 or 48 month time period that's in the guidelines binding, and is that the only way to think about this? I think that given the situation you're describing, I think these were standard kind of procedures that CTC uses on most of these funding programs. Some of these projects may have longer lead times than that, and I think that can be probably negotiated, but we will try to clarify that in the guidelines, because the intent is not to have a project that has legitimate longer term expenditures to be excluded, but in certainly rolling stock contracts are ones that often go longer than 3 years.
Right. And
So
think
I
you can see
recognize that.
progress on the contract. You just not maybe have to extend the entire amount expended by that time.
Right, and typically, you know, we follow the typical CTC approach of once the allocation's been made by the CTC, wanting you to be in a contract by 6 months later, or ask for an extension on that. And so that is something that we do at that point of actually allocating for a given phase of a project. That is the expectation. That's kind of the baseline in the program.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, well, following the formal part of the presentation here in the Q&A, we will also stick around in the room to have informal discussions. So are there any other questions that people want to ask? Brian, is there anything else that you'd like to add? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time here today. Again, we've got the room, so if you have additional questions, we'd welcome those. But thank you for coming to the workshop today, and we look forward to the applications that will be submitted to the program. Thank you.